They came like ghosts on the waves, cutthroats, outlaws, and legends. Their black flags struck fear into the hearts of sailors, their names whispered in terror along America's coastlines. These were no ordinary criminals. They were kings and queens of the high seas, rebels who defied empires, men and women who carved their stories into history with blood and gold. From the monstrous Blackbeard, who set his own beard aflame in battle, to the ruthless Edward Lowe, who made men beg for death. From the fearless Bonny, who fought like a demon, to the cunning Jean Lafitte, who played both pirate and patriot. These 10 pirates didn't just steal treasure, they stole the world's imagination. But how did their reigns of terror end? And which of their secrets remain buried beneath the tides? Set sail as we dive into the untold stories of America's most feared pirates. Blackbeard, Edward Teach. Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, was one of the most infamous pirates to ever sail the Atlantic and terrorize America's coastlines. His fearsome image, complete with a long, thick black beard and slow-burning fuses tied into his hair, made him a figure of terror for both merchant sailors and colonial governments. Born in England around 1680, Teach likely started his career as a privateer during the War of Spanish Succession before turning to piracy. By 1716, he had joined the crew of pirate captain Benjamin Hornigold, quickly rising through the ranks. When Hornigold retired from piracy, Blackbeard took command of his ship, a captured French slave vessel, and transformed it into the powerful Queen Anne's Revenge, mounting 40 guns on board. Blackbeard's most notorious act came in 1718 when he blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, holding the town ransom for medical supplies. His fleet seized several ships, and he threatened to kill hostages if his demands were not met. The terrified colonists complied, and Blackbeard released the prisoners unharmed before sailing north. He then sought a pardon under the Royal Proclamation of 1717, which promised clemency to pirates willing to surrender. However, unable to resist the lure of his old ways, he returned to piracy shortly after. He established himself in Ocracoke Island, North Carolina, using its shallow waters as a hideout. His reign of terror ended in November 1718 when the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, sent a naval force under Lieutenant Robert Maynard to hunt him down. In a brutal battle off the coast of Ocracoke, Blackbeard fought fiercely, suffering multiple gunshot wounds and deep sword cuts before finally succumbing. According to legend, even after being shot 5 times and slashed across the body, he continued to fight until his head was cut off. His severed head was hung from Maynard's ship as a grim warning to other pirates. Despite his violent end, Blackbeard remains one of the most legendary figures of the Golden Age of Piracy, his exploits immortalized in history and popular culture. Stede de Bonny. Stede de Bonny was an unlikely pirate, earning the nickname the Gentleman Pirate due to his wealthy background. Born into an aristocratic Barbadian family around 1688, Bonny lived a privileged life, owning a sugar plantation and serving as a militia officer. Unlike most pirates, who turned to crime out of necessity or adventure, Bonny seemingly became a pirate out of dissatisfaction with his domestic life. In 1717, abandoning his wife and comfortable existence, he commissioned the construction of a 10-gun sloop, the Revenge, and set out to raid ships along the American coast. His lack of naval experience, however, quickly became apparent. Seeking guidance, Bonny allied himself with the infamous Blackbeard, who took control of his ship and crew, effectively rendering him a figurehead captain. Under Blackbeard's leadership, Bonny participated in various raids, including the blockade of Charleston. However, after Blackbeard abandoned him and stripped his ship of supplies, Bonny sought to redeem himself. He briefly accepted a pardon from the governor of North Carolina and attempted to resume privateering legally. Yet, unable to resist the pirate's life, he soon returned to plundering under the alias Captain Thomas, to disguise his identity. Bonnet's career ended in late 1718 when he was captured near the Cape Fear River by Colonel William Rhett's forces. After a dramatic attempt to escape, he was recaptured and taken to Charleston, where he was tried for piracy. Despite multiple pleas for mercy and attempts to negotiate clemency, he was sentenced to death. On December 10, 1718, Stade de Bonny was hanged, his once aristocratic status offering him no protection from the gallows. Though not the most successful pirate, Bonny's unique background and his association with Blackbeard made him a fascinating figure in pirate history. Charles Vane. Charles Vane was one of the most ruthless and defiant pirates of the Golden Age, known for his violent nature and unwavering resistance against colonial authorities. Born around 1680, Vane first emerged as a pirate in the early 18th century, serving under the notorious Henry Jennings in raiding Spanish ships and settlements in the Caribbean. As Spain and England struggled for control over the Americas, Vane took full advantage of the chaos, attacking merchant vessels and plundering coastal towns with little regard for the consequences. Unlike some of his contemporaries, who sought pardons or tried to transition into legitimate privateering, Vane had no interest in redemption and remained one of the most notorious outlaws of his time. Vane became a feared figure along the American coast, particularly in the waters around the Bahamas. In 1718, when the British attempted to curb piracy by appointing Woodes Rogers as governor of the Bahamas, many pirates accepted the king's pardon to avoid execution. Vane, however, openly defied Rogers, burning a captured ship in Nassau's harbor as a show of defiance before escaping with his crew. His reputation for cruelty was well earned. He often tortured prisoners and refused to grant quarter to those who resisted him. Leading a fleet of pirate ships, he continued to terrorize the southeastern American colonies and the Caribbean, attacking English, Spanish, and French vessels indiscriminately. His downfall began when his own crew grew tired of his erratic leadership. In 1719, after refusing to engage a heavily armed French warship, his men mutinied, declaring him a coward, and voting to replace him with his quartermaster John Rackham, Calico Jack. Cast adrift in a small boat with a handful of loyal followers, Vane struggled to regain power, but was ultimately captured after a storm wrecked his vessel on an uninhabited island. Disguising himself as a shipwrecked sailor, he attempted to join the crew of a passing merchant vessel, but he was recognized and arrested. In 1721, he was taken to Jamaica, where he was tried, convicted, and hanged. His defiance until the very end cemented his legacy as one of the most rebellious pirates of the era. Anne Bonny. Anne Bonny was one of the most famous female pirates in history, known for her fierce spirit and fearlessness in battle. Born around 1697 in Ireland, she was the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy lawyer and his maid. To escape scandal, her father moved the family to Charleston, South Carolina, where Anne grew up with a rebellious nature. She married a small-time pirate named James Bonny, but their marriage was an unhappy one. When he turned informant for the British government, Anne left him and ran off with the charismatic pirate John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack. Choosing a life of adventure over the domestic constraints expected of women at the time, she dressed in men's clothing and fought alongside Rackham's crew, quickly earning their respect. Anne Bonny was known for her violent temper and bravery in combat. She fought with pistols and cutlasses, displaying a level of aggression that rivaled any of her male counterparts. Alongside her close companion Mary Red, another female pirate who disguised herself as a man, she helped lead daring raids along the American and Caribbean coasts. The two women fought with such ferocity that even seasoned pirates admired their courage. Many accounts suggest that when their ship was attacked in 1720 by a British naval force sent by Governor Woodes Rogers, most of the male crew were too drunk to fight. Anne and Mary were the only ones who put up a real resistance, battling fiercely before ultimately being captured. After their capture, Anne and Mary were sentenced to hang, but both claimed to be pregnant, a common legal strategy that temporarily delayed execution. While Mary Red died in prison, Anne's fate remains uncertain. Some believe her wealthy father intervened, securing her release and allowing her to return to a quiet life in Charleston. Others speculate she may have escaped or continued her pirate ways under a new identity. Regardless of her ultimate fate, Anne Bonny remains a legendary figure in piracy, remembered for her courage, defiance, and refusal to conform to the expectations placed upon women in her time. Mary Read. Mary Read was one of the most formidable female pirates of the Golden Age, known for her courage and combat skills. Born around 1685 in England, she had an unusual upbringing. After the death of her legitimate older brother, her mother disguised Mary as a boy to continue receiving financial support from her late husband's family. Mary maintained this male identity throughout her youth, eventually enlisting in the British military. She proved herself in battle, fighting bravely in the War of Spanish Succession. However, after falling in love with a fellow soldier, she revealed her true identity, married him, and settled down. Tragically, her husband died young, leaving her widowed and without direction. Seeking adventure, she resumed her male disguise and set sail for the West Indies. While working aboard a ship, Mary's vessel was captured by pirates, and she was forced to join them. She quickly adapted to the pirate life, proving herself in combat and gaining the respect of her new crew. Eventually, she joined Calico Jack Rackham's crew, where she met Anne Bonny. The two became close allies, both dressing as men during raids and fighting with a level of ferocity that surpassed many of their male counterparts. Most of the crew did not initially know Mary's true identity, and it is said she only revealed it to Anne after Anne mistook her for a potential rival for Rackham's affections. Mary's reputation for bravery was well earned. In one incident, she reportedly challenged a fellow pirate to a duel to prevent him from being ambushed by another crew member, killing the would-be attacker in a dramatic sword fight. When their ship was finally captured by British forces in 1720, Mary and Anne were the only ones who fought back. The rest of the crew, including Calico Jack, were too drunk to resist. They were all taken prisoner, and the men were sentenced to death. Mary and Anne, however, managed to delay their executions by claiming they were pregnant. Unfortunately, Mary Read's fate was grim. Unlike Anne, who may have escaped or been released, Mary fell ill and died in prison in 1721. Her story remains one of the most remarkable in piracy history, proving that women could be just as fierce and fearless as their male counterparts. Her legend continues to inspire tales of adventure, rebellion, and the fight for independence in a world dominated by men. William Kidd, Captain Kidd. William Kidd's story is unique in the annals of piracy because he may not have intended to become a pirate at all. Born in Scotland around 1654, Kidd started as a legitimate privateer, commissioned by the English government to attack enemy ships and protect British interests. Unlike most pirates who operated outside the law from the beginning, Kidd initially worked with the backing of powerful sponsors. In 1695, he was given command of the Adventure Galley, a heavily armed vessel outfitted for privateering. His mission was to hunt down pirates and enemy French ships in the Indian Ocean, but circumstances soon led him down a different path. Kidd's downfall began when he struggled to find legitimate targets, and his crew, frustrated by a lack of plunder, pressured him to take matters into his own hands. In 1698, he captured the Quedagh Merchant, an Armenian ship sailing under a French pass, but owned by Indian merchants. This was a controversial move, as some saw it as a lawful prize while others viewed it as piracy. The act sealed his fate. When news of his actions reached England, he was declared a pirate. Realizing he had lost the support of his backers, Kidd tried to clear his name by returning to the American colonies and seeking a pardon. However, the political landscape had shifted against him. He was arrested in Boston in 1699 and sent to England for trial. Despite his claims that he had only acted within the bounds of his privateering commission, he was found guilty of piracy and murder. In 1701 he was hanged in London, and his body was placed in a gibbet over the River Thames as a warning to others. Some believe Kidd was a scapegoat, sacrificed to appease political tensions, while others argue he had indeed crossed the line into piracy. One of the most enduring aspects of Kidd's legend is the belief that he buried treasure before his capture. Though some of his hidden wealth was recovered on Gardiner's Island off the coast of Long Island, rumors persist that more remains undiscovered. This myth has inspired countless treasure hunts over the centuries. Whether he was a true pirate or an unfortunate privateer who fell afoul of politics, Captain Kidd remains one of the most enigmatic figures in maritime history. Samuel Bellamy, Black Sam. Samuel Bellamy, better known as Black Sam Bellamy, was one of the most successful and romanticized pirates of the Golden Age. Born in England around 1689, he grew up as a sailor and later traveled to the Americas seeking fortune. Unlike many of his contemporaries who turned to piracy out of desperation, Bellamy's story is often linked to a tale of love. According to legend, he fell in love with a woman named Maria Hallett in Cape Cod, but lacked the wealth to marry her. Determined to make his fortune, he set sail, initially attempting to find treasure from sunken Spanish ships in the Caribbean. When this venture proved unsuccessful, he turned to piracy. Bellamy quickly rose to prominence, joining forces with the experienced pirate Benjamin Hornigold. However, when Hornigold refused to attack English ships due to his allegiance to the crown, Bellamy and his crew mutinied, electing Bellamy as their new captain. This decision set him on a path of ruthless piracy. Unlike many other pirate leaders, Bellamy was known for his democratic leadership style and treated his crew with fairness, earning their loyalty. He also had a reputation for being merciful to his captives, which contrasted with the brutal tactics of many other pirates. He called himself the Robin Hood of the sea, robbing the rich merchant ships while treating their crews with respect. His most famous capture was the Whydah, a massive slave ship loaded with gold, silver, and goods. The Whydah became his flagship, making him one of the wealthiest pirates of his time. His fleet terrorized the American coast, particularly along the Carolinas and New England, capturing numerous ships. However, Bellamy's career was short-lived. In April 1717, while sailing north to reunite with Maria, his fleet encountered a violent storm off the coast of Cape Cod. The Whydah was wrecked, sinking with Bellamy and most of his crew. Only 2 men survived, and the ship's treasure was lost beneath the waves. Bellamy's legacy endures as one of the most successful and charismatic pirates in history. In 1984, the wreck of the Whydah was discovered, confirming the incredible wealth he had accumulated. His story, blending romance, adventure, and tragedy, continues to captivate historians and treasure hunters alike. Edward Lowe. Edward Lowe was one of the most feared and sadistic pirates of the early 18th century, known for his extreme cruelty toward his victims. Born around 1690 in London, he grew up in poverty and turned to a life of crime at an early age. As a young man, he traveled to the American colonies, working as a deckhand and later as a ship's rigger. However, honest work did not suit him, and after a dispute with a ship's captain, he and a group of sailors mutinied, taking control of their vessel and embarking on a life of piracy. Unlike some pirates who sought wealth with minimal bloodshed, Lowe was infamous for his brutal treatment of prisoners. He gained a reputation for torturing captives, mutilating those who resisted, and sometimes setting entire ships on fire with their crews still aboard. His fleet, operating primarily in the Caribbean and along the American coast, became notorious for its merciless raids. Lowe took great pleasure in striking fear into sailors, often forcing prisoners to choose between death and joining his ranks. His flag, featuring a red skeleton on a black background, became a dreaded sight. One of Lowe's most infamous acts occurred in 1723 when he captured a Portuguese ship. Furious at not finding enough loot, he tortured the crew, cutting off the ears, noses, and lips of officers before executing them. Even other pirates viewed his methods as excessively violent. His unchecked brutality eventually led to distrust among his crew, and by 1724 he was abandoned by many of his men. His final fate is uncertain. Some accounts suggest he was captured by the French, who executed him in Martinique, while others claim he simply disappeared. Regardless of how he met his end, Lowe's reign of terror remains one of the darkest chapters in pirate history. Unlike romanticized figures such as Blackbeard or Bellamy, Lowe's name is remembered with pure fear, a symbol of the brutality and lawlessness that defined the worst of the Golden Age of Piracy. Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte was a pirate, smuggler, and privateer who became a legend along the American Gulf Coast. Unlike many pirates of the Golden Age, Lafitte operated in the early 19th century, playing a complex role in both crime and American history. Born around 1780, possibly in France or the French Caribbean, he and his brother Pierre set up a massive smuggling operation in Louisiana. Using the swamps and bayous of Barataria Bay as their base, they built a network that trafficked goods, weapons, and slaves, evading American laws and selling their plunder to eager buyers in New Orleans. Lafitte was not just a criminal, he was also a shrewd businessman and strategist. His Barataria stronghold became a thriving black market hub, drawing merchants and adventurers alike. Despite his illegal activities, he maintained political connections, bribing officials and navigating the shifting loyalties of the time. His most famous moment came during the War of 1812, when the British sought his aid in capturing New Orleans. Instead of siding with them, Lafitte warned the Americans and offered his services to General Andrew Jackson. Though initially skeptical, Jackson accepted his help, and Lafitte's men played a crucial role in the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. Their artillery expertise and knowledge of the local terrain helped secure a decisive victory against the British. After the war, the U.S. government briefly tolerated him, but soon pressure to eliminate piracy forced Lafitte back into outlaw life. He moved his operations to Texas, establishing a new base on Galveston Island. There he continued his smuggling and piracy under the guise of a privateering commission from revolutionaries fighting Spanish rule in Latin America. However, by 1820, the U.S. Navy cracked down on his activities, destroying his Galveston base. Lafitte fled into obscurity, and his final years remain a mystery. Some believe he died in battle against the Spanish, while others suggest he lived under an assumed identity. His legacy remains one of contradiction, a pirate, patriot, and criminal who shaped the history of the Gulf Coast. Calico Jack, John Rackham. John Calico Jack Rackham was a flamboyant pirate best known for his colorful clothing, his short but eventful career, and his association with two of the most famous female pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Red. Born around 1682 in England, he earned his nickname due to his preference for wearing brightly patterned calico clothing. Rackham first emerged as a pirate in the early 18th century, serving under Charles Vane. In 1718, after Vane refused to attack a well-armed French ship, his crew mutinied and elected Rackham as their new captain. Unlike Vane, who was known for his brutality, Rackham was seen as more of a cunning strategist than a ruthless killer. As a pirate captain, Rackham's exploits were relatively modest compared to legends like Blackbeard or Samuel Bellamy. He primarily targeted small merchant vessels in the Caribbean, capturing ships and recruiting new crew members along the way. However, his most lasting claim to fame came from his relationship with Anne Bonny. The two became lovers, and Anne joined his crew, disguised as a man. Their partnership became even more infamous when they were joined by Mary Read, another female pirate who had hidden her true identity for years. Together, they raided ships, with Bonny and Reed earning reputations as fierce fighters. Rackham's downfall came in 1720 when his ship was attacked by a British naval force near Jamaica. Unlike his fearless female crewmates, Rackham and most of his men were reportedly too drunk to fight. Anne Bonny and Mary Red were the only ones who put up resistance, cursing the men for their cowardice. After their capture, Rackham was sentenced to death. Before his execution, Anne reportedly visited him in prison and told him, "If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." On November 18, 1720, Rackham was hanged in Port Royal, and his body was displayed as a warning to other pirates. While he was not the most successful or fearsome pirate of his era, Calico Jack's story endures due to his association with Bonny and Reed. His legacy is cemented by the now iconic Jolly Roger flag, featuring a skull with crossed swords, which has since become one of the most recognized symbols of piracy.